I hand over to my colleague Krista, who will introduce the speakers.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Krista Cameron, I'm Professor of History at the university here, and I'm delighted to be coming along to support Hera. These events have been amazing, and annoyingly this is the only one I've actually been able to get to, but just talking to Hera about the broader project and her work, it's such an amazing asset to have it in the university and in the department, and particularly to put these events on this over this month. She's worked so hard on those, and it's been great, and there's been sort of creating a real buzz about it. So I hope that tonight's event is as good as I've heard that all the others have been. And we've got 4 speakers tonight, and they all want to be introduced together now. So we're starting off with Sarah Homewood, who is going to present a piece of video art to us, and Sarah's also going to say a little bit about herself in the introductory stage. We then move on to Holly Shipley, who has another piece of installation art, video art to show us, and again we'll be speaking about that. We then move on to the more sort of traditional, if you like, academic performances. So of course, being academics, we all know what we want to say about each other. So the next speaker will be Alana, who is from King's College, London, and Alana works on, at the moment is working on a project on Catholicism and contraception in the 1960s. Her book, The Schism of '68, Catholicism, Contraception and the Humane Vitae in Europe, 1945 to 1975, is just hot off the press with Palgrave Macmillan, so Q's forming at bookshops even as we speak.
I have discount forms.
And the discount forms are available at today's event. And then our final speaker of the evening is Hera Cook, who is a New Zealander currently working at the University of Otago in Wellington. Hera's done a lot of work, many of you will be familiar with this. She wrote the definitive history of the pill, and more recently has been working on why we have female cosmetic genital surgery. So that is our lineup of speakers this evening. Without any further ado, I will hand over to Sarah Homewood, who will kick us off.
Can I just say something? I'm Sarah Homewood. I'm actually a PhD student at the IT University in Copenhagen, and I'm studying interaction design. And I look at how technology is shaping our bodies. My background is in dance, so I take a very kind of embodied perspective on technology, and I think you might see that in this. And what I'm going to show you is it's a speculative scenario, which is about the contraceptive microchip implant, which is a new form of kind of contraception, which is going to be released in the next 2 years. And you're going to see some kind of details about this. But I just want you to know that this is really coming while you watch this video. Can you hear the lights?
Where's that?
I had a contraceptive implant put in today, remember?
Yeah. I almost forgot. So you are a cyber now.
Yeah, I'm a sex robot.
Are you too long now? Or are you too long? How do you feel?
I don't know, it was weird. I have a computer inside me, so...
It has a remote control, doesn't it? Where is it?
Under my bed. I didn't really know what to do with it, so I just put it in a box. I guess I won't be using it for a long time anyway.
Until you want a baby.
Yeah, I suppose so. I will have it for 16 years. Yeah. But I guess I can just turn it off if I get side effects from hormones or something. I might lose my sex drive. Or get really fat. Mm-hmm.
No, is that something? So, you just turn it off? Is that something you can do? Doesn't sound very natural to me. Did the doctor say you could actually do that?
I don't know. Well, how does she know?
They might be tracking you. Yeah. Wait, they could actually be hacking into your body.
Shut up.
Did she show you how to use it?
I didn't really ask and she didn't tell me. I just look at it up if I need to know.
So you just press the button.
Mm-hmm. Well, apparently it has to be touching the skin as well.
Like this? Suppose? Fuckable, fertile, fuckable, fertile, fuckable, fertile, fuckable, fertile, off.
Come on.
I might turn it off when you're asleep and then you wouldn't know.
Can we please stop talking about this?
No, I like these. I wish I could have a remote control for my body too.
Well, that's not the point. I just don't want to get pregnant, that's it.
I know you don't. But if you wanted to have a baby, could you have a party when you turn it off? Kind of a pre-baby shower?
Yeah, definitely. And I'll make sure you're invited, by the way.
So the script for this film was actually developed along with women who'd already had the normal current contraceptive implant. Because my kind of research was, I wanted to get as close to the actual experience of what's going to happen when we add digital technology implants with contraception. What's that going to be like for us? And what are the risks? And there are a number of really interesting aspects of this device. Seeing as it's actually funded by the Gates Foundation as part of his aim to kind of reduce carbon emissions, which is on the pathway towards eugenics, and that's another thing. But all of those kinds of concerns about, what about hacking into the body? If you're in an abusive relationship, could your partner? How is this going to change the role of a medical professional? Nurses are going to have to sit there and their patients are going to say, could this be hacked? What happens if there's a malfunction? How is it going to be accessed could it be accessed by other people? So I actually kind of worked with these women again and medical professionals in developing a speculative leaflet. What are nurses going to need to know? What are people going to be worried about when this comes along? Yeah. And also, what's that remote control aspect going to look like and be like? Are there new things that can happen? I actually ran some workshops after this, and people came up with these two remote controls in two parts. So it became a kind of an engagement ring. You give the other half to your partner, and when you put them together, then you decided that you want to try and have a baby. So what kind of new openings, not only to be super critical, which I kind of am, but also to see, if this is coming, which it is, what are the benefits, possible benefits there for us as well.
Hi, my name is Holly Slingsby. I'm an artist and I'm based in Margate. I work primarily in performance, and sometimes I make live performances and sometimes I make performance to camera. And the work in this exhibition is performance to camera, and you're going to see some extracts from it. The work itself is just under 10 minutes long, so I'm going to show you kind of like about half of it. And the work was shot partly in a studio and partly in landscape. And you're primarily going to see the studio footage here. It is the more kind of medicinal footage. The work kind of explores, I'm interested in belief systems, and the work explores belief systems relating to fertility treatment or ideas of fertility in a kind of folkloric or ritualistic practice and in a contemporary medicine kind of context, and that's informed by my own experience of having fertility treatment. I think that's all I want to say about it before we see it, and I'll say a bit more afterwards.
Wash hands before preparing injection. Use a new syringe and needle each time. Alternate injection site to avoid sensitivity. Wipe rubber bung before each use with sterile wipe provided. Insert needle fully at an angle of 90 degrees. Push plunger down till all fluid disappears. Wait 5 seconds and then remove. Go to the carved white horse and stand in its eye. Circle there 3 times, clockwise. Wash hands before preparing injection. Remove white bung from pre-filled syringe and attach mixing needle. Insert needle centrally through rubber bung of medication vial. Push all fluid into vial and gently rotate vial till fluid is clear. Draw all of contents back into syringe. Discard mixing needle and attach injecting needle. Hold needle upright, tap for air bubbles. Hold the syringe upright as shown. Gently tap on the syringe until any air bubbles collect at the top. Insert the entire length of the needle into the skin. Release the pinched skin, then inject all the medication while pushing slowly and steadily on the plunger. Gently push plunger till you see a drop of fluid at the tip of the needle. Pinch skin between the thumb and forefinger and insert needle fully. Inject into abdomen. Remove syringe/needle after 5 seconds. Discard old needle and syringe in sharps box.
about this kind of idea of ritual action and the belief that you invest in that ritual action. So either you're going out to the carved white horse at Uppington and turning 3 times in its eye as a kind of folkloric practice that's meant to make you more likely to conceive, or maybe you're taking all these medicines at a certain time every day, but either way you're kind of performing an action with the intent and hope of that leading to a certain outcome. So I feel like there's a kind of similarity there. And then just to kind of go in a little bit more to some of the other things that you saw and heard, the kind of instructional texts in the video are appropriated from instructions that are given to IVF patients about how to take their medicines. And visually, those kind of wreaths with the syringes, which I'd also put these kind of eggs and rabbits into. If you look on Instagram under all the like hashtags to do with IVF patients, a lot of patients, when they finally achieve pregnancy, make a commemorative wreath in either a circle or a heart shape with all their medicines they've taken, all the paraphernalia of the syringes and the needles and the pill packets. And they make these kind of commemorative wreaths that either have like the ultrasound scan in the middle or maybe a baby grow in the middle, and it's like this kind of totemic celebratory image, but also quite creepy to see this kind of baby surrounded by syringes. And I was really interested in that image as a kind of, like a kind of ancient wreath making, but with a really contemporary set of kind of plastic objects. And then thirdly, another kind of visual reference I wanted to just draw on was a particular painter called Carlo Crivelli, who was a 15th century Italian painter, painted a lot of Madonna and Childs, and he uses the kind of pictorial device of a cloth of honour, which is like this big fabric backdrop. And he painted a lot of saints in that way as well. So the backdrop that I use is a hospital curtain. And again, the costumes are kind of slightly like those kind of saint or goddess costumes with the robes, but also with the hospital robes. So there's a kind of deliberate kind of pick and mix sweet shop approach to those kind of references. And that's quite typical of the way that I work. This work, in a sense, is not typical of the way that I work in that it's much more explicit about this idea of fertility and the medical treatment, and that's kind of the first time that I've made the work directly about it. And this is the first time it's been shown anywhere, so it's quite exciting for me to see it out in the world. Yeah.
I've been asked to actually sort of offer some comments from almost an academic perspective, and Hera and I both have the benefit of seeing the entire sort of films in part, so I'm going to sort of interweave some of my comments with references to the piece as well. So I'm delighted to be here as part of this event, and I thought I'd just sort of speak briefly through what I call 3 key framings that seem to me to pick up sort of issues related to the sort of history of sexuality, the history of hormones and contraception, and the ways in which this connects ever so slightly into some of my research agendas. So the first, which Holly's brought out sort of briefly just in her closing comments, is effectively the juxtaposition of the natural and the mechanical or the chemical and technological innovations, and the ways in which we think about this. I've thought about this as a historian of the 20th century, and particularly a historian that's been examining debates in the 1960s within a particular sort of medico-moral setting, particularly sort of Catholics, thinking about what was natural and what wasn't in the context of the pill. So obviously sort of in Holly's film, we've got sort of estrogen and the Blessed Virgin Mary, the Madonna sort of juxtaposed, and this sort of wonderful playing with the notion of what fertility goddess is and means, and a juxtaposition of fertility rituals and the kind of routines around IVF. And I think the mechanical voices, the injections, the shaking syringe tub, and actually also the plastic noise of unfurling the pessary gives a really sort of interesting kind of soundtrack to some of these rituals. Sarah's sort of female narrator talking about whether she is, or her partner suggesting that she's now a robot, that she might be trapped or hacked, is sort of a really interesting sort of way in terms of thinking about sort of, classic sort of notions of the cyborg female body. but also the nature of that film and the conversations there that we're effectively privy to. It feels very private, very organic, very domestic, and very sort of intimate. And so there is this sort of sense in which we have sort of the natural and the organic and the embodied sort of through there. And I think what both pieces do is ask us, they're provocations to think about almost the artificiality or the artifice of the natural. What is the natural when it comes to interventions around trying to actually sort of stop contraception or actually aid conception. If we think about Hippocrates and thinking about sort of peony roots and crocuses and laurels and nettle seeds way back, or the insertion of stones as early IUDs, there have been mechanisms and interventions in the female body since the beginning of time to try to actually sort of understand and also control women's reproductive functions. And it's not sort of in some ways, if we look through that lens, sort of a far cry to actually then think about the creation of synthetic hormones from yams. I think the other interesting thing too is thinking about how the technologies sort of then enable us to sort of move through different modes for that. So I brought along this little visual prop. I've been doing a lot of work with an artist on period tracking apps, and then thinking about pre-period tracking apps and pre-Android phones, the ways in which women sought to actually track their cycles in the 1950s, with sort of so-called sort of engineered notions about sort of figuring out where ovulation occurred within the cycle. This is called the rhythm meter, by the way. But also thinking about sort of the history of condoms from animal skins, and then developments in rubber technologies and plastics that actually sort of move that technology on further. So a lot of this is sort of then circulating on a sort of expanded knowledge around reproductive physiology and the ways in which sort of understandings of women's sort of menstrual cycles and fertility have changed over time. And in terms of the work that I've been doing sort of on this sort of intervention around natural family planning, or what might be sort of called fertility awareness methods, the kind of distance travelled from the 1930s to the 1960s with the advent of the pill, and the ways in which sort of Catholic medical practitioners sought to speak into those debates, thinking about the evolving knowledges of the female reproductive cycle, the menstrual cycle, and the ways in which they could actually hold on to the notion of the natural while actually sort of planning family size, or actually sort of controlling reproduction. So we have in the 1930s Marie Stopes' famous sparring partner, Halliday Sutherland, who writes a famous book, a very well-known book, and a very popular book at the time called The Laws of Life, seeking to think about what the God-given natural laws are and the ways in which, through knowledge of those, we could actually have some measure of control over that, but be moving through a system that actually was not artificial. In the 1950s, we have sort of papal sanction of so-called rhythm method, or the extent to which knowledge of the cycle meant that you could abstain at certain periods. And a number of Catholic doctors seek to actually set up natural family planning clinics, or rhythm clinics, to actually start to provide an alternative to the barrier methods that were then available. And then, of course, into the 1960s, intense debates from 1963 onwards with the advent of the hormonal contraceptive pill about whether this was natural or not, whether this was more natural than the barrier methods, because in intervening to stop ovulation, you weren't actually interfering with the sexual act. And very, very contentious and very complicated debates there, with actually a majority of theologians, Catholic gynecologists, psychiatrists and sociologists actually saying that the pill should be licit. And this, of course, was overruled in 1968 by the Pope, to great controversy and great sort of outrage in the Catholic world across Europe. So part of what we're sort of thinking, I think, about here is the ways in which assisted technologies for either contraceptive purpose or conception purposes have changed over time. And curiously, the ways in which kind of failed technologies might be rehabilitated. In terms of the work I was doing last year around this artistic piece that I produced around the menstrual cycle, I did quite a bit of work researching the growing popularity or resurgence of the use of the coil, sort of IUD technology by young women, but also the ways in which sort of many 20-something young, sort of hetero young women are actually seeking to use period tracking apps to actually make decisions about their reproductive cycles and their contraceptive choices because of fears about the pill and mental health, and a number of sort of forums around Vice and the like, Mad About the Pill, Women's Hour, even with the Debrief, and feminist collectives actually speaking to this space about hormones and the effect of hormones on women's bodies. And this raises all sorts of complicated, and I think it's sort of pressing questions about these apps, or these microchips too, as an analogy to this, and the ways in which sort of women actually do understand intricately sort of what's happening to their bodies, and the ways in which this technology can aid and really sort of facilitate sort of agency around those choices. So a sort of a second framing, sort of thinking about the natural and the mechanical, I thought quite a lot in watching both pieces about embodiment and materiality. They merge sort of strongly as sort of two important themes. And Sarah's sort of dialogue that you saw here, thinking about the female body as either fuckable or fertile, but not both simultaneously maybe. I don't know, really interesting sort of juxtaposition there. The kinds of discussions around side effects, about sort of sex drive and being fat, and the ways in which those issues around side effects were discussed, as Hera will doubtless maybe sort of speak about too, sort of with the release of the pill. The notions of embedding technology in one's body and what that does to the body, and the extent to which the body is therefore vulnerable to hacking and the like. But also in the latter part of the film that I urge you to sort of watch, around this notion of the two remote controls and the necklace or the talisman, and the way in which joining the technologies together opens up issues around when conception takes place. And turning on and off, as you've called the piece. Obviously, sort of Holly's piece, thinking about the female body in motion, the actual footage sort of out of the White Horse where you're rotating in the eye, and thinking about sort of the actual meaning of hormones itself, about meaning motions. So this actually made me think sort of quite a lot too about basically feminist positions on these technologies, and maybe sort of variations around sort of womanist positions where biological determinism sort of fits in these narratives, and the extent to which in both renderings here, this is a female, the onus is on the female, which of course, you know, thinking way back to Margaret Sanger, who was working sort of to actually sort of make birth control technologies available to women, that was actually meant to enable women, release women from the domination of these contraceptive choices by their husbands. But the alternative sort of here, if we think about the role of masculinity of male partners in this process, and the fact that in many of these renderings it's still the women that have to take sort of full control over this, although there are some sort of spaces in terms of sort of male cooperation that might be sort of part of the story. And then finally, I was sort of thinking about the role of authoritative epistemologies, of truths, and religion and science as offering sort of two framings for all of this. Obviously, in Holly's rendering, sort of the medical and the belief systems, the religious systems are equally kind of opaque. There's a ritualised engagement with it, but a deference towards a kind of a routinized sort of performance of that act without a full sort of interrogation in some ways about what's going on. I thought that the disease that we see in the film with the intravenous sort of injection sort of, you know, gives a sort of an interesting sort of insight into that, and the decision to actually make the medical voice female was a really interesting artistic sort of intervention here too. And obviously sort of thinking about the doctor not knowing much about this, you know, the internet will tell us, the ways in which, you know, this is now sort of inserted in the fictional female's body. She doesn't really know how it works, and the whole intricacies of what this is doing to sort of the relational sort of configurations, but also the ways in which there's an engagement with one's own body, and so thinking about the visceral dimensions of all of this too, the extent to which you feel it under the skin. So basically I sort of found them sort of intensely stimulating pieces as a sort of historian sort of thinking about these things over time, some curious sort of circularities and continuities despite obviously sort of profound changes in terms of the technologies now available to women to assert measures of control over their bodies and their reproductive sort of capacities, but also the extent to which there are sort of contradictions, precarities, fragilities around all of this that come through both films beautifully. Thank you.
I'm Hera Cook. Okay, I work on sexuality and emotion and kind of reproduction as something that's not necessarily separate or separable from sexuality. Now I've got a piece in the catalogue, so I'm going to start off by reading a couple of quotes from what I've got in the catalogue and then comment on. So what I finished off with in the piece that I'm reading from the catalogue, the end is in 2005, the World Health Organization, International Agency on the Evaluation of Carcinogenic Risks in Humans, assessed current hormonal contraceptives, so the pill and the implants and so on. And they found that the relative risk of developing breast cancer is, quote, slightly increased in present users and recent users compared with never users. And that, quote, the risk of cervical cancer increases with duration of use. Worldwide, around 100 million women are estimated to be currently using the pill, and there are perhaps 300 million ever users. A very slight increase in risk translates into large absolute numbers of women. And those who did not take the pill have not escaped. The fishbowl we call Earth is now a bath of estrogens, with 30 years of research showing human and other animal wastes are feminizing male fish. Human male sperm counts are falling for unknown reasons. There may be no change in female human animals, but any change would be extremely subtle and might not have to do with sex characteristics. So would we know? Okay, and I began the piece by asking, what part of our being do hormones create? How might the chemical reordering of the body by oral contraceptives alter us? I start from the position that I am, like you, an animal. Our capacities in being are afforded by our bodies. There is nothing else, no old man in the sky, no wheel of karma. Donna Haraway's cyborg women, her vision of the blurring of boundaries between humans and machines, which has obviously come up in everything everyone else is talking about. The fluid interactions fusing the natural and the artificial has been embraced as a means of framing such questions. And then I talk about the pill for a bit. Now, so as chemical cyborgs, as a result of the pill, which skipping forward through the middle of the description, Haraway characterised those who rejected technology and rejected her concept of becoming cyborgs as spiritual earth mothers fighting patriarchy with essentialising visions of female as nature. That was, however, only one approach. Enjoying having a female body, including menstrual cycles, is a radical break with the past and with contemporary culture. Okay, so thinking about having the body that we have, we've kind of got to this point in feminist theory where there is no natural body. And I'm kind of interested in what can we have if we don't have a natural body, but we don't have this cyborg. We don't want to be cyborgs either. And then to some extent, as Howard says, we can't escape it. But on the other hand, there are an awful lot of choices down the path, down the route. So what seems to be coming for me out of the three of you, in fact, is a sense of a particular type of of binary choice between a natural, which is spiritual or God-given, traditional, and a cyborg, which is chemical. It's also capitalist and corporate, and it's about constructing a particular kind of relationship to authority. So we have authorities who give us these hormones, who determine what they're going to do or not do for us, who are shaping what we become. You know what I think is perhaps there's another way, another kind of having the body that we have. And one of the things that I've been doing a lot of in the last few years is history of emotion. I think that what an important part of this is the intensity of the emotion that we're talking about when we talk about all of these experiences, how painful and distressing they may be, and how also joyful. So coming to fuckable and fertile, fuckable or fertile, well, traditionally people found baby making really erotic. There's a very strong sense of that possibility. And that erotic charge partly came out of the sense of the joy, the potential joy, and the enormity of the creation of another being. So that's one way that people were having a body that we no longer potentially see ourselves having. And to talk about something negative, I'm afraid I'm going to talk about the negative side of kind of Catholicism. And if we think about the Catholic natural method, the Billings method, this was very much handed down from authority. And if we look around the world at the moment, the WHO says that 12% of maternal deaths in Latin America and the Caribbean are coming from unsafe abortions. And part of the reason those women are having unsafe abortions is the Catholic Church and very rigid anti-abortion laws across almost the whole of Latin America. And of course what we're seeing, the astonishing things we're seeing in the United States. When I finished my PhD on the pill back at the end of the 90s, I thought contraception was a done deal. You know, there were a few places where really we were going to kind of push the boundaries and get in there, but it wasn't controversial. And what's happened in the interval is suddenly there are whole areas in the United States where abortion is almost unavailable and contraception is presented as something that only sluts want, only sluts are doing, or women who talk about themselves using contraception are sluts, which is just astonishing. Another thing, a kind of less well-known thing, but one I find really quite distressing, is thalidomide. I imagine you all know, I don't imagine you all know what thalidomide is, but thalidomide was a drug that was given to pregnant women to control nausea. It produced very serious tetragenic effects, which means it deformed the fetus. So you had babies born with no arms or legs, potentially their hands and feet growing from the trunk, or arms that were only elbow length. And we've seen a generation of the people who, or the thalidomide babies of the 1960s coming through their lives in Western countries, but in Latin America, thalidomide has been used as it's partly a cure for leprosy, because it acts on the extremities, which of course leprosy does as well. But on the packets they had a warning that pregnant women shouldn't take this. So pregnant women, desperate through the lack of birth control and the lack of legal abortion, thought this meant it was an abortifacient. And you have a new generation of thalidomide babies. Not so many, but any too many. Not that I wish to suggest that being disabled is necessarily an unlivable option, but the discovery that you're producing a child that has been made disabled by the drug you took in the hope that you would have that child is an extremely tragic outcome. Okay, so that's the kind of, when we think of those painful and distressing outcomes, those are some of them. Now, just to come back to the videos, and this kind of natural chemical binary of bodies and selves, I was really struck with Sarah is that the computer becomes almost more important than the self. That the control of birth almost kind of overwhelms the woman's own sense of her body and what the possibilities are of that feeling. And it's really interesting just to get, and I know I keep coming back to births, but in one US state they did a very substantial piece of research on implants, contraceptive implants, which of course are quite costly as methods, and they gave them away for free, and they provided really very complete counselling. And what happened was that unintentional pregnancies fell very strongly, but in today's world, unintentional pregnancies are actually a lot of births. It takes a lot of courage to have a baby, given the costs, given the lack of support. So if you wipe out all those unintentional births, you know, even if we go back into the 50s and 60s and 70s, if we wiped out all of the unintentional births, I imagine quite a lot of us wouldn't be sitting here today. So maybe we need those unintentional births, maybe we need, so part of that kind of, that natural body, the body that we have, is that we don't have controls. Our intentions can't actually limit us completely. And I really liked, and I haven't said I really enjoyed the video. I think the video is showing us something about where we are, but it's also showing us something about the pleasure of being where we are and the game of being where we are. And that kind of sensual joy of a different kind of exchange around the potential for pregnancy. And I really enjoyed the fact that we had a man and that we looked at that man. So maybe we also lost his body. And I don't know how you do it with his body, but they both of those bodies. And Holly, you obviously were kind of exemplifying this choice of science or spiritual traditions. And again, the body that we have isn't really present in those spiritual and scientific traditions. And I think that's really what happens with IVF and with fertility treatment, is that you lose your body, you lose your sense of who you are. And it's a hideous experience. We come back to painful and distressing. I think IVF is for many, many people, because it's one of those things we don't talk about. We don't talk about the incredible failure rates. And it's a very painful process. And even for those people who have a birth at the end of it, it's pretty much guaranteed to fuck your sex life. It's a really unpleasant experience for many people, and we don't have a big way of talking about that. We don't have a big way of sharing that. And I guess at that point I could kind of almost leap off into, in the catalogue we have a whole range of hormonal experiences, trans experiences and other kinds of experiences, and a lot of them have they're a struggle. You know, this kind of chemical, capitalist, corporate body that we can have constructed for us is an emotionally draining body. It's a body that we struggle to achieve. In a way, we struggle to achieve that idea of pregnancy, struggle to achieve that intersex resolution. We struggle to achieve that trans resolution. It's an emotional, physical process, and one of the things, of course, is that our emotions are embodied. And I'd just like to finish up by saying, working on female cosmetic genital surgery and the evolution of that, what's really clear is how fragile women's connection is with their sexual pleasure. These surgeries destroy sexually responsive tissue. And women come back and they say their sexual experience is improved because they feel better about being looked at. And I find that an extraordinary thing. That's a real alienation from our bodies and how fragile our real connection with that body that we have seems to be.
Oh, sorry. When everyone sat down, we've got about 40 minutes for questions, and I don't intend to take Jazz prerogative and take the first one. So, anybody got any questions or comments that they'd like to throw out to begin with? Hera.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Sarah. I mean, I've seen the entire video, read a bit membership as well, but I was wondering if you perhaps could tell us more about this new technology. Maybe the audience that doesn't know much about it. How many women are going to use this membership? I mean, Hera mentioned that is Hera or Alana that is actually expensive. In which countries we experimented this membership? Yeah, if you could tell us a bit more. Yeah, because I found this new technology really interesting.
Well, what I'm gonna be saying is what is based from reading their papers, because obviously everything's secretive, and what I know from where they got their funding, basically. So I can't be quoted directly, but so this technology is actually, it's called a pharmacy on a chip. And it's actually not only a contraceptive technology, but it's a microchip with thousands of reservoirs which you can fill with any kind of medicine, and that's implanted in the arm, buttock or stomach, and it's pre-programmed to use a tiny electrical current of, minuscule, to melt whatever liquid is held in the reservoirs, which goes into the user's bloodstream. This is real. So they've tested it with people with osteoporosis. That's the only in human trial they've done so far. I think they're doing another one now. But one of the main things on their website is that it's one of the best cases for it is contraceptive. And I've read this somewhere that the story is that they had an office and a lab in MIT, and Bill Gates was there wandering around MIT, and he walked in and said, "Could you make this into a contraceptive method?" Because him and Melinda Gates have this large 2020 family planning project, which is about reducing the world population. So this is what it's based on. So I suspect that this is what they're working on now. But in the past, the Bill Gates funded fertility control have been mainly in Africa, and there's been, I mean, you can kind of guess what's going to happen in some ways. And also, if you think of the trials of the next Nexplanon implant in America in the 1990s, where women were paid to have it implanted, and then not given support to have it out again. And it's exactly the same hormones, except that it lasts as the Nexplanon, so it's levonorgestrel it's called. So you have massive, I've had it as well, had massive side effects from it. Not good for everybody, but this one lasts for 16 years instead of 5. And that's why you have the remote control. So during the 16 years, if you want to have a baby, you turn it off, get pregnant, have your baby, turn it back on again. Is that enough? Does that make it clear? It is. I mean, I was told it by a sexual health nurse when I went for a meeting, and it just blew my mind. And it's doing interaction design. I mean, it's just, yeah. But yeah, I don't have any date for it. I mean, they said 2018 a couple of years ago, so now it's probably a bit later. So, yeah.
You were speaking about the Catholic Church and birth control. I worked in Brazil for 5 years and a long campaign to all sort of people. But the evangelical churches are equally expecting on the Catholic Church that not approving of fundamental religious basis.
Yeah, I guess the only thing about the evangelical Protestant churches, which is certainly making a running in the US, is that they're not actually so dominant on a worldwide basis as the Catholic Church.
South America is really heavily now, it's huge. It's really overtaken. I worked in liberation theology, which was really different. And then they were sort of, and because they wouldn't let the people that were coming from outside that supported that work, they let in the evangelical churches who were equally controlling lots of levels. So I think it's massive. It's not.
This issue of authority is what's at stake.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And certainly there's not much difference, I think, between
well, if you look at the alt-right, some religious alt-right in the States, they are working into the same thing, machine.
Yeah.
It's
not as really enough. And it's good thing to do.
The other thing that struck me particularly about what you were saying, because I'm a historian of book and suffrage, so I've spent about 4 days solid in the past month with the centenary of suffrage, doing various interviews and things, in which people always say, but of course, a lot has changed now, and of course our lives are so different. And, I have actually said publicly, well, the vote is just something you're given, and people actually do sometimes have the vote taken away from them. And of course, this was what happened, particularly with black women in America when they got the vote in the 20s, and then all people of colour lost the vote in America in the 30s and 40s. So actually, things can be given and they can be taken away. And everybody says, we've got every imaginable society in which women didn't have the vote. But when you think about things like contraception, and it was contested, and now you can't imagine not having contraception in Britain, but there are parts of America, as Hera said, where suddenly it's really difficult to get contraception. I think we do need to be continually aware that many of our rights are temporal. And, it's not this sort of constant forward march.
We've also had a kind of complete is perhaps the wrong word, but abortion has been made into some kind of incredible last resort. Whereas sort of early medical abortion, as far as I'm concerned, is a pretty good option compared to 16 years of, and barrier methods. Pretty good, really. They give it all the time, and that combination means that you're only whatever the look. We're meant to get pregnant when we have sexual intercourse. That's what our bodies think they want to do. So it's never going to be straightforward to say we don't want this to happen. How we want to prevent it. But nonetheless, I think barrier methods and early abortions are a pretty great combination. But they're an unthinkable combination, an unacceptable combination. So we go to something like 16 years of hormones dripping into your body with a remote control. I mean, God, can you imagine keeping hold of a remote control for 16 years? I mean, presumably they'll be kind of basic and replaceable or something, because they have to be, but all the same. I don't know that I'm willing to trust it. It's a pretty big step to think that a woman had at the point where she got it.
It's at the cost that it's kind of the female experience at the cost of it being so effective, and they confused kind of technical efficiency, which is about things not breaking, longer battery lives, for example. All of that, like the way that we go with that, they've confused that with women's bodies. Like that's the only way I can see it. And then they do human trials in osteoporosis, and there it's really great because efficiency and eradicating human error is really important. Getting the right dosage every single day is very important. But they can't just. They did, but
yeah.
The interesting thing on that is a whole lot of this sort of almost sociological work that they did around period tracking apps, and they used amongst sort of 20-somethings, is the barrier method. And many of the young women talked about the extent to which it meant that their male partners had to take responsibility and actually had to think themselves about the consequences of sex and sort of where things were in the cycle. And in part, some of them talked about the ways in which sort of greater knowledge of their sex drive and the ways in which that maps onto the cycle meant that there were also conversations that could be had between sort of hetero partners about what was wanted when and what sort of positions to be used and all sorts of other things. So really interesting opportunities to sort of aside from sort of the hormone method, to actually start to think about issues around pleasure and shared responsibility.
Yeah, I can't imagine how you could do something like, obviously I'm being completely foolish because lots of people could, but I find it almost unimaginable that you could use some kind of temperature method. Your body temperature changes by a small amount as you ovulate, so there's temperature methods, and some of the period tracking apps I think are using those things and so on, but you can do that yourself. It's pretty hard work, but nonetheless, any of those methods ask you to attend to your body. And could you keep the vision of your body as something that other people see?
rather than something that you feel, that you experience, if you were using that kind of contraceptive.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I'm back to the female cosmetic genital surgery because it seems like a kind of exemplar of what could go wrong with how we experience our bodies.
I know, I was just going to say that as well as the temperature tracking, there's also the tracking of like your cervical mucus, and that is a much more physical
It's lovely,
thing that's like knowing and noticing your body, and it is physical and it is kind of really private, and it does teach you about your body in a way that you, like, I was shocked how little I knew about my own body before using one of those apps. I was like, why is nobody teaching me this at school, for example? And you can, I think some people use those apps, like they export the data and share it with their partner. So then there can be like this kind of shared understanding of what's going on. But actually for me, it made me appreciate and feel my physical body more rather than feel alienated. But I deliberately didn't get involved in like measuring my temperature. I spoke to a doctor who said, the more you're observing, taking your temperature, doing everything, the more you're going to raise your own stress levels. And then your stress hormones could counteract your reproductive hormones. And then you're into this whole kind of
Whereas the mucus thing
what's
is kind of
useful.
nice. I mean, the mucus thing is sort of gentle and engaged and all of those other
and it's
good
kind of
things.
non-medical. It's just like,
Yeah.
oh, that's what your body's doing.
And that kind of knowledge too, that knowledge of the body that we have, that goes on through menopause and those kinds of changes. And, you know, and I've just been looking, as part of this thing I started thinking, I came across this funny reference to Chinese women washing their daughters' vaginas, traditionally. And it's an extraordinary idea, isn't it? I mean, I cannot conceive of any circumstance in which my mother would have washed my vagina. It is unthinkable. As a child. I mean, I don't mean vulva. I mean your internal vagina. It's inconceivable within our culture, really, I think. I guess there's a bit of stuff on enemas, you know, sort of going back to being a historian. There's quite a bit of stuff on enemas, but enemas are, you know, you have an instrument, God knows. Look, I don't know what this Chinese is, but I've got really curious about other cultural ways of experiencing our genitals. And I think the mucus thing is the closest we come to any really different way of experiencing our genitals, any way that isn't somehow alienated.
That was an Australian Catholic doctor that developed that.
Yeah.
Interestingly. Again, around this whole notion of almost pushing so hard at the natural, but also the extent to which the monitoring and the like is a very empirical, technical, mechanical process in some ways too. So sort of hence the ways in which these categories do blur and break down ultimately if you look hard at them, I think.
I think it's interesting when algorithms are used. I'm always going to talk about technology, sorry. But when natural cycles, the one that's just been improved, fertility method, that as soon as an algorithm is thrown into the mix, and as soon as it's given a
scientific information.
Scientific thing,
Yeah, certain scientists did it, therefore it must be
exactly, it's given,
Yeah.
she was a physicist and made her own one, and it's given some kind of weight, and I think that's really interesting, and the kind of shift between analog methods and digital methods of menstrual cycle tracking as contraception. I think there's some kind of perception there which isn't actually right, and also, what are the algorithms built on? You know that you can be an expert. The more you track within natural cycles, the better you are at tracking, the less you pay for it as you go up, because they're using your data to train everybody else's. That's basically how it goes.
And they were ambassadors too. They came to the exhibition in November that I had on, and are complete sort of converts. They were on sort of missions to actually get people to use the apps.
And the difficulty with so much of this is that there's so many pluses and minuses. The pill was really a wonderful thing for many women introduced. And there's no question but having more effective fertility control. That's partly why I talked about the example of Latin America. Effective fertility control is a fantastic thing in our lives. It's just how do we we balance? How do we maintain that sense of who we are, of being the body that we have, and not the body that someone else is presenting us with?
And the notion too, which of the normative body is the female fertile body, and the extent to which that isn't, of course, the case either, and ways, I mean, as Hera was saying about discussions about IVF, but also around miscarriage, I mean, all of these areas that still remain very strongly taboo around women's bodies, talking about, I mean, again, last year when this thing was about menstrual blood, and we don't want to talk about the visceral dimensions of our bodies. We're fluid, excreting creatures, animals, and there's a whole element of our embodiment that actually still remains quite taboo and beyond.
But actually there's not much research on periods, and I guess one thing I think about period tracking apps, if they're collecting the data, I've got a friend at work who's always had extremely painful periods. She's one of those people that had to take days off school, and she's just doing a small research project trying to get information about girls who have to take days off school and go on to women who have to have days off work and so on. And I actually found that quite challenging, because I'm someone who always enjoyed having periods and always sort of, surveying career and tasting your menstrual blood and looking at the different colours and blah, blah, blah. That's what I encountered as a teenager, and I think I was really lucky. I was also really lucky that I got a few mild cramps, but if I got out and did some exercise, they tended to go away. So I actually found Sarah's very negative experience of her periods and her desire to research this quite confronting initially. But it kind of goes into this mix of this lack of a real sense of where does that come from? No one understands why some people have naturally painful periods. No one understands why other people have really good experiences. And that required a different type of interest in research. One of the things about the history of the pill is you really understand how much of a kind of medical research that has been done has either been into childbirth, which is entirely appropriate because it's an extremely important event in all kinds of ways, or it's been in areas where there is money to be made, and things like periods where there's not a lot of money to be made out of them in any way that you know.
But now there is though, and that's why, now there really is with these companies clearing everything, and that's why it's become trendy. I really think that's why it's
so some way
they can monetize it. They can sell you a monitor, they can sell you the app, they can subscription. It's changed everything.
Yeah. So we go back to mucus and hopefully someone won't make money out of it.
So mucus is anti-capitalist.
Yes. What's the question?
Yeah, just a question, maybe actually two questions. One is follows one of your comments, and you'll be talking about basically these implants as a way to monitor the amount of estrogen, amount of hormones that women can take just to control the fertility, to be pregnant. So the idea I got from you is basically what technology adds in this case is basically just a monitoring how much you can take and monitoring how basically avoiding the fact that women can forget or just to take the pill, and so basically making sure that everything goes right, and But is technology not really kind of coming to help to also try to avoid the side effects of estrogens or whatever hormones? And is it not just a possibility, a potentiality that can be explored? Because once you've got something in your body, maybe you get the electricity can tell you how much you need of the sunset, how much your body differs from other bodies, because we know that that is the future of medicine, when, you know, we will know what we need exactly. Not everybody is the same, plus most of the medicine have been, you know, as we know from the history, have been tried on men and having on women, and therefore the dosage was not. So my question is, what was the purpose of that, apart from, you know, kind of making sure that you get something with also with the kind of side effect that you can, you know, probably imagine, and also the idea to have something implanted in you for 16 years until you think, okay, I would like to get off something and get off completely, not just, you know, switching on and off something that is still inside your body. So that was the one question. The other is there a trial on men as well to control fertility at the same level? It talks about having the possibility to do that in the future.
The first question, I think that it's, so with the kind of remote control, which is the second part of the film, I really tried to take what are the positives from this? And so I held these workshops as part of design research, to hold workshops and participatory design and get people, and a lot of medical experts and people from different fields, and they made these different types of remote controls, because when something is an implant, it's difficult to talk about it really. But the remote control part is actually, because you can be creative with that, and you can test out different ideas. And quite a few of them had remote controls that could dial up or down the hormones. This is not something that they're interested in, by the way, because it takes a lot of, but I mean, theoretically, you could, you know, an artificial pancreas, people with diabetes, it's self-regulating. Ideally, theoretically, this could work for that. I mean, ideally, these hormones should be improved, you know. Anyway, that's a different story. And as for the tests on men, I mean, that's basically to do with you. I'm sure you'll know more about this than I will. But what I understood was that it's very easy to sterilize men when you're testing out contraceptive hormones. And so that's also part of the reason is that women's bodies are less valuable than men's bodies. But that's also part of the reason that hasn't been used. But if you mean for other medicines and things, then I'm sure that they can use it for contraception. You must know more about male hormonal contraceptives.
Well, they keep trying, you know, there's a constant sort of drive towards this idea of some kind of male hormonal contraceptive. And it is pretty clear that men have never been willing to consider the kinds of consequences that women experience. But on the other hand, I've kind of decided I don't think that's all bad, actually. I'm not sure that. I'm kind of hoping the pill and the kinds of ways we've been using hormones might come to be seen as not really completely acceptable. I mean, the thing I said about, you know, the amount of estrogen in the environment now is truly amazing. It passes through our bodies, it goes into the water. The issue of why men's sperm counts are falling, I mean, I think, you know, men's sperm counts falling is kind of great in a way, because it's kind of like the canary in the coal mine, isn't it? And they're going to get really upset, actually. And there was a long period when it was really unclear whether the sperm counts were falling, because there wasn't great data from the early period, but now it seems pretty incontrovertible that they are. And so maybe we get to rethink this. And maybe, I'm not saying I think it's great that men haven't taken their share of the responsibility, but in the end, you know, if only 50% of the human race had to have their bodies fucked about with artificial hormones, then that's probably better than 100% of the human race having their bodies fucked about with artificial hormones.
Interestingly, in IVF, even if it's male factor fertility, it's the woman that has to have all the medicines and all the surgeries. So, regardless of what the problem is, the impetus is all on the woman. And the kind of invasion and the kind of like disturbance, if you like, physically and psychologically and emotionally and everything, is all on the woman's body.
I think that's true, although I think some men find producing sperm samples really hard and quite distressing.
Yeah.
Actually, the kind of artificiality of what it does to.
Yeah.
And I think maybe women are more used to kind of having varying sexual levels of sexual desire and not having the same kind of control of their sexual desire, whereas I think a lot of men kind of take it for granted and actually having to do it in an artificial situation can be hard. But I'm not really challenging the basic point, which is because IVF is like a really concentrated dose of what the difference between what it means to be female in terms of information and what it means to be male, and both biologically and culturally. So there's a cultural burden there, which maybe doesn't need to be there, and there's also a biological burden, which belongs there.
It would be such a nice sequel to your film to do on a male partner's experience of, would you, what would be the kind of this more spiritual or
Yeah, I'm just thinking,
holistic side of it?
I mean, I guess there is male fertility iconography.
Yeah.
But it's not so like insidious into how, I don't think, into how we currently see male bodies as the female iconography is into how we feel about female bodies.
I think that's true, because I think a lot of the male iconography around fertility went into that kind of erotic potential of baby making.
Yeah.
The erotic potential of making someone pregnant. And as we've kind of lost that, I don't think we have a new way of symbolically thinking about men and fertility in a kind of a deeper traditional sense. Yeah. You could extend it.
I'm just thinking about almost, to walk through museums and those various emphatic sort of statues and the like. The interesting thing about the remote control in your film was that it basically was it was penetrative in terms of putting the two together too. So I think there are resources that you could excavate, but as to whether they are sort of as a bit more subterranean in our cultural zeitgeist than some of those for the females. So that was the interesting thing as a historian of religions have been all of this too, particularly Catholicism, the use of the Madonna as sort of theotokos, and the extent to which it's almost like sort of virgin birth sort of territory, to the extent that the male is absent.
Absolutely. And the idea of the miracle birth. The kind of birth without sex.
Basically fertilizing yourself through interventions in the body. I was thinking quite a lot along the lines of sort of Hera's point about emotions, about the way in which emotions do play through both films, and the almost pared back sort of use of the suppository packets tearing and the syringes rattling the wind out, which obviously is a real big out there, sort of the light horse too, but how that is sort of the soundtrack to your piece. And I guess thinking sort of absolutely about how this is emotional territory that both films are traversing, and the different sort of methods that you use to navigate that.
Yeah, I make work in quite an instinctive, improvised kind of a way. Like I have all the material visually that I'm researching, and I have like my own experience and my own kind of materials in terms of the injection instructions and the actual like medicines and the, if you like, kind of autoethnographic research of like the lived experience. Then when I come to make a work, I don't really have a shoot plan, and I don't have like a soundtrack plan or anything like that. I kind of go in the studio or I go in the location and I have the stuff and I have some sort of idea of what I'm going to do with the stuff, but I'm essentially improvising. And then the editing happens in quite an instinctive way as well. So I guess the emotional side of it comes through in that part of the process. Somebody who I showed the film to quite early on while I was editing it said that he felt it was a really lonely piece of work. And I think although I hadn't planned that, that was a really kind of, it was kind of satisfying because that's what the experience is like. So I kind of conveyed that without really even setting out to, but it kind of came through as just like a direct result of working in that kind of instinctive way, I think.
And maybe that is a difference between the folkloric sort of juxtaposition you've got there, because those fertility rituals oftentimes were women's, there were whole sort of female ceremonies built around them too, and you felt sort of enveloped in a sort of female culture that actually sort of enabled conversation about and support through that process. So whereas some people sort of prefer IVF. And the interesting thing is the ways in which online communities seem to be places to actually sort of supplement.
Absolutely, because you have that anonymity. So like, you might not want to tell all your friends and family members what you're doing, but you feel that you need to talk to somebody that understands what you're doing. So you have like the community part of your fertility tracking app, or you have like the Instagram or the like fertility forums that are the place where people, and you don't, you're not using your real name necessarily, but you're able to talk about the real like raw day-to-day experience of what you're going through in that kind of way, in a way that people don't talk about it in real life, because it's kind of real life, because it's kind of taboo.
And painful too. I mean, it's the whole issue about public and private ultimately, and the extent to which.
But isn't it interesting, because 40 or 50 years ago, people weren't. Sorry, I'm just thinking about 40 or 50. Do I mean 60 or 70? But anyway, people really weren't talking about these things in the media or magazines that much. It was kind of breaking away, and now we have these conversations happening in the media, and we have a kind of funny sort of substrate of people who seem to be having these conversations in their lives. But my impression really is that for the majority of people, what you're saying is true. Certainly in this culture, and even in America and Australia, I think the Australians are more in your face. It's one of the things I really love about Australia. But New Zealand's a bit more like here, but yeah, people still really aren't. There's a whole, and maybe we get generational change, and maybe the kind of the next generation will be more willing to talk about these things face to face, because they would have grown up with these online and media discussions. But at the moment, we still seem, I think, not to be talking about them with the people we know. I think that anonymity thing is really important. And it seems kind of sad. In fact, it seems really sad. And when people do break through and they have those conversations, it's easy to criticise and to create critiques of notions of openness and for transparency and sharing is necessarily better, but nonetheless, I think often they are.
Yeah, I think I was quite reluctant to start making work that was directly about my own personal situation. I was finding that I was being subconsciously drawn to all these kind of mother goddess imagery, and it was kind of creeping into the work. And then I got to a point where I was like, I'm just going to make the work about it, because maybe somebody else will somehow benefit from seeing that, or being able to talk about it or think about it. And also it kind of became like an empowering thing to do, that even if the treatment isn't going to work, maybe somehow I get some agency back because I'm doing something creative with the experience. But it was something that I feel kind of vulnerable to do. And I wouldn't sit down with my family members and talk about cervical mucus, but here I am in a room full of strangers talking about it. It's kind of weirdly empowering.